So, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. It's quite the title, and I'm sorry, I was going to have like a bigger introduction, but this is my favorite film of the year. I have to get that out of the way right now. This is one of my favorite films of the year thus far, and it's going to be very hard to top. So, how do we even describe this film? People have been describing this as a multiverse film, and it very much is. But I think it's when you say like multiverse, you think it's just going to be kind of like a comic booky superhero type film. And it definitely does have those kind of like wild sci-fi aspects. But there's so much more to this film than that I feel like just describing it as that doesn't do it justice. So I guess I'll kind of like walk through what I love about this film. So the film takes place in the contemporary day, where you have this character called Evelyn Wang, played by Michelle Yeoh. And basically, like, her life is crumbling. Like, nothing is going right. She owns a laundromat, where she struggles to deal with customers. She has a daughter, Joy, played by Stephanie Sue, and she's struggling to connect with her. You know, she can't really, she's struggling to connect with her daughter. They have kind of been at each other's throats. She's in a relationship with another woman, so that kind of, Joy is, so kind of like complicates the relationship a little bit, especially with Evelyn's father who's staying with them. Yeah, and of course, Evelyn's father is played by James Hong, who he's in his 90s. He's still rocking it. Oh my God. And on top of all this, she's struggling with her husband, who is now contemplating divorce, secretly. And it's kind of like unloaded on her at the worst time when she's going in for her taxes, which are handled by a character played by Jamie Lee Curtis, who kind of like melts into a different role. And basically, like, nothing is looking good in her life right now. Like, she has issues with taxes, she has issues with her husband, her father, her daughter, her laundromat, the customers. Everything is coming down on her. And you can feel that, because, like, she daydreams a little bit, that she wants an escape. She wants something more to her life. And she kind of gets that when her husband, Waymond, who's played by Ki Hugh Kwan, her husband, out of nowhere, changes. Like, her husband, who's usually pretty meek, carries like a fanny pack and has glasses, suddenly takes off the glasses and says, "Hey, I'm your husband from another universe, and we need your help because the whole multiverse is crumbling, and only you can save the day." And it's kind of like, how is this happening? And of course, like, she's kind of like, Evelyn's as like a fish out of water. She's thrown into this and has to like pick up on a lot of stuff that happens faster. Because once that moment happens, when her husband confronts her and says, "You need to save the multiverse," things get wild really fast. Like, martial arts starts happening. Like, her husband starts using the fanny pack as a weapon. And she realizes that she has to save the world from this entity that basically wants to destroy all the multiverse, because she's basically been spread out around it, and finds little meaning in existing if her existence is spread out over all of time. So she basically wants to destroy all of existence. And she does it with a bagel. I don't want to divulge too much of how this works, but essentially there's... the weird MacGuffin is that there's a bagel that will destroy all of the world. And if that sounds weird and wild, that's because it is. And that's not even the weirdest part. It gets even wilder. Like, I'm struggling not to spoil too much here, but I will say this. In order to save the world, Evelyn is able to tap into different versions of herself from other realities. Like, the reason that they pursue her is that she seems like the world's last hope, because she's the worst version of Evelyn, which is an insult. But then it's kind of interesting, because if you're the worst version, then how many better versions of yourself can you tap into? And they kind of do that. Now, the way that they do this is they have a little device that they put in their ears that can tap into the abilities of other versions of yourself in other universes if you do something that you would not do in your reality. So, and this is basically an excuse to do like the wildest stuff. So like, you can gain like a certain ability if you give yourself a paper cut. You can acquire like special martial arts skills if you say that you love a particular person you had no interest in. Basically any wild and random stuff you can do. And at first it's instructional, saying like, okay, if you want to get to this universe, do this. But then Evelyn loses contact and the instructions on how to do this. So basically, she has to do just anything wild, anything bizarre and out there that she would never normally do to gain new abilities. And she does it in the wildest ways. I won't spoil too much, but there's an intense scene where she's fighting two people, and one of the ways to get powers is through butt plugs. and believe it or not, that's not even like the weirdest thing that happens in this film. Although it's up there. There's so many wild elements here. There's like, she goes across a whole bunch of different multiverses. There's a universe where she becomes an actress. There's a universe where she becomes a chef. And probably the most bizarre universe of all, and some people have seen this in the trailers, there's the universe of hot dog fingers, where Evelyn has a much different life, a much different control of her body, and a much different sexuality, which is just like wild, and it blindsides you, because like as the battle grows more intense between like this mysterious figure, who I won't reveal because I think it's a great reveal, she starts zipping across other universes. So there's an animated universe, of course, because you got to have that. There's a universe where animals control people's heads like Ratatouille. There's a universe of piñatas, and probably my favorite universe, there's a universe of just everyone's a rock, and they speak to each other through subtitles. And yeah, it's a very strange and bizarre, but also like a film that has an emotional focus to it. Like, it feels like it's just like, the way I'm describing it here, it kind of sounds like Crank, where it's just throwing everything in the kitchen sink at the scene, everything in the kitchen sink and the bathroom and all that at the screen. But actually, it does maintain an interesting focus on trying to find meaning in existence, because the whole deal is like, Evelyn doesn't feel like she has much to live for at the very point where her husband comes into play. Her husband from another universe, obviously. But I think it's interesting because she's posed in a way where she basically has to confront the naysayers in her life, that life holds no meaning, and that if you can't control your life, and if you're bound by a certain existence, that it seems better to just end it all than to keep it going on. And there's certainly a great aspect of generational divide when you look at the characters in this light. And basically, because even though like there's a lot of like cool martial arts fights, and there's mech suits and there's weapons and all these cool fights, it's ultimately a battle of basically like contentment versus nihilism, essentially. Because basically the whole deal is that Evelyn has to convince this one person that life is worth living, and that it's not worth shutting down. That life is a gift, and that it is what you make of it, and you can make it a brilliant world, or you can make it a terrible world. And I kind of like how Evelyn comes to this realization, like almost kind of like mid-fight, and realizes that violence is kind of not going to save the day, and she chooses the most bizarre means of getting rid of like all these like antagonists who come after her. Like, she finds just the right way to tap into what these people are feeling and how to convince them not to fight. Which is beautifully bizarre, but also perfectly on point for a film like this. It's just like a lot. I think I definitely want to rewatch this film, because I was definitely hearing from a lot of people saying that some of the elements of this film went over their head just because it's so fast paced. Like, it's like, I mean, this film I think it's like 2.5 hours, and it's so quick. It is so fast paced. If you see this in the theater, it will, like, time will just pass like so quickly for this, because it taps into like so much weirdness and like kind of like absurd elements, but also gives your brain like a lot to chew on for this whole like argument of existence. And also presenting a lot of like interesting scenarios where basically like Evelyn is given a choice where you can kill this person who will destroy the entire multiverse, or you can try to find another way and try to reason with this person. And I love how much of that comes on Evelyn's shoulders. Like, for the first act, of course, it feels like Evelyn is being shoved into this world, and she's basically forced around to conform to these rules to save the multiverse. But then as it goes on, it becomes more of like Evelyn's own realization to understand people and basically come to terms with her own life so that she can help those who need her most in her life. And there's a wonderful dynamic throughout it. Everyone is on point here. Michelle Yeoh can still rock it. She has the perfect reaction to all this absurdness going on, where she'll often like mispronounce stuff and she'll misinterpret pop culture. That's all fun, but then of course you have the fun fight scenes where she still has it. She's got these amazing fast-paced fight scenes through. Mainly through this office building, but there's a whole bunch of different sequences. Ki Hui Kwan Ki Hui Kwan. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's amazing in this film. Like he comes out of nowhere. You assume he's this one type of character, and then he's forced to put on these different roles, which he just melts into perfectly. James Hong. I doubt how much I have to mention that James Hong. He's been an actor for he's like, I think he's like 93 years old, and he's been in like tons of films, and he's so great. He's amazing here too. Like he easily goes from being like this feeble old man who questions the world to being this like stern commander. Like later in the film, he gets in a mech suit, and it's brilliant, and he commits to it. Like the thing is, I was watching an interview with James Hong in a film he did in the 70s called The In-Laws, and he talks about how it's a lot funnier if you play stuff straight. And he realized that, and that comes into play very much in this film, where a lot of the humor comes from just how absurd it is and how straight everyone plays it. How they have like very human reactions and don't lean too far into the comedy. Like, Michelle Yeoh with hot dog fingers is funny on its own. So if you try to actually make a compelling romance through that, like, it feels earnest, but it's still funny. You have these hot dog fingers that ooze mustard, and it's ridiculous and bizarre, but also sweet. Like, that's, in terms of like all the universes that she visits, that's probably the most like heartfelt. Now that I think about it, and especially to Stephanie Zhu as Joy. She does like quite a bit in this film. She's very prominent in the picture, and wow, she goes for it. There are so many great scenes where she can keep up with Michelle Yeoh in terms of the fight scenes. Although her fight scenes are given a little bit more absurdity with like wild cuts and different abilities to manipulate atoms. Man, I'm trying not to spoil anything here, but I gotta mention there is a great fight scene that involves basically like wrestling, confetti, and dildos. And it's bizarre, but it's also fast paced, and like I said, this film feels like it could have gone off the rails and forget everything that it wanted to say, and could have just been like a random assortment of wild acts. And for a while during the fight scenes, it literally does become that. But ultimately, you need more than that to make a film, and thankfully, the duo who directed this film, the Dan Kwan and Daniel Scheinhardt, referred to as like the Daniel brothers or something like that. They have done an amazing job with this film. They have amazing editing skills here. They know just when to cut. They know how to cut between different universes. They keep the pace very fast. They dissect the film into 3 different parts, very much like a title. Like the first act is everything, the second act is everywhere, and the third act is all at once, and it all connects together very, very beautifully. Where like even like the third act, which kind of feels more like an epilogue, actually kind of like does bring together everything beautifully here. And it's just such an astounding film. Like it's one that you can like laugh at so much as like you can, like there's a lot to ponder in it. Like it's just a beautiful, beautiful, surreal, absurd film with martial arts and hot dog fingers. And it's just, I love this film so much. It's going to be hard to see if there's a better film this year. It's possible, but right now this is at the top of my list.